What would you do if a barefoot boy, dirty and desperate, ran into your driveway screaming that your wife had cut the brakes on your car? Would you laugh it off or stop and wonder if your life was about to end? Arthur Morgan, a millionaire businessman in New York, prided himself on control. His house was immaculate, his cars polished to perfection, and his days scheduled down to the minute. On this particular morning, the sun lit the manicured lawn in golden stripes, the kind of morning that promised nothing unusual. Arthur's imported sedan gleamed in the garage like a jewel waiting to be shown off. Normally his driver handled the commute, but today Arthur had decided to take the wheel himself. He told himself it was because he enjoyed the feel of driving every now and then, though part of him simply wanted the satisfaction of sliding behind the wheel of the car that symbolized his success. He adjusted his tie as he walked across the courtyard, the faint smell of fresh coffee wafting from the kitchen. His wife, Larissa, hadn't appeared yet. Usually, she lingered on the upstairs balcony, robe wrapped around her like armor, phone in hand, scrolling endlessly through calls and messages. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing hinted that this day would be different. Arthur opened the car door and slipped inside. The smell of leather and polish filled the cabin, comforting in its familiarity. He turned the key, and the smooth growl of the engine purred to life. He exhaled slowly. Just another day. Contracts, numbers, handshakes. Nothing dramatic. And then it happened. A sound ripped through the morning stillness, footsteps pounding on the pavement outside the gate, followed by a voice sharp with terror. "Don't drive!" Arthur flinched, twisting in his seat. A boy no older than 12 was sprinting toward the open driveway. Thin, dirty clothes hanging loose on his frame, hair unkempt, feet bare against the asphalt. His eyes were wide, his face pale. He looked like a ghost child emerging from the streets. Before Arthur could react, one of the security guards rushed forward, grabbing the boy by the arm. "Off the property!" the guard barked, already trying to drag him away. But the boy thrashed, shouting again, louder this time, his words like a knife through glass. "Your wife cut the brakes!" The world seemed to freeze. Arthur blinked, certain he had misheard. Cut the brakes. His wife. It was absurd, so absurd it should have been laughable, and yet laughter didn't come. Instead, something cold slid into his chest, a chill that no amount of logic could erase. The guard shoved the boy back, snarling, "Get lost!" But the child didn't break eye contact with Arthur. His gaze wasn't pleading for money or pity. It was a gaze begging to be believed. "I saw her," the boy insisted, his voice cracking. "Last night, in the garage." Arthur's hand tightened on the steering wheel. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was nonsense, that some kid had made up a wild story. But another part, quieter, heavier, kept him frozen in his seat. Then came Larissa's voice. From the balcony above, she appeared in her pale robe, phone still in hand, eyes flashing down at the scene. "What is going on?" she demanded. The boy's face changed instantly. Fear and fury collided in his expression as he stared up at her. He stumbled back as if realizing he had said too much, that he was exposed. "He's an intruder," the guard said quickly, still gripping the boy's arm. Arthur forced his voice steady. "Just a kid looking for attention." He waved a hand. "Take him away." The guard began pulling the boy toward the street, but before disappearing from view, the child twisted in the guard's grip and screamed once more, "You'll get hurt, I swear." The words lingered in the air long after he was gone. Arthur sat there, engine humming, his pulse loud in his ears. He glanced up at Larissa, who now wore a mask of practiced concern. "What was that about?" she asked, voice feigning confusion. Arthur shook his head. "Nothing. Just some crazy story." Her lips curved into a soft smile. She laid her hand gently on his shoulder. "Children like that will say anything for attention. Don't let it ruin your day. Go to work, love." He nodded, but the unease didn't leave him. He slipped the car into gear, rolled down the driveway, and passed through the gates. In the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of the boy standing on the sidewalk, eyes locked on him, burning with a warning Arthur couldn't shake. The avenue was calm. The city was waking up, traffic light but steady. The radio murmured a soft tune, but Arthur barely heard it. All he could see was that boy's face, dirty, desperate, deadly serious. All he could hear was the echo of that impossible accusation. Your wife cut the brakes. His hands tightened on the wheel. It was ridiculous, impossible, and yet why had the boy been so specific? Why mention the garage? Why Larissa? Images flickered in his mind. Larissa slipping away at odd hours, her excuses flimsy. Nights when he'd woken to strange noises from downstairs, brushed off as the washing machine. Times she lingered in the garage longer than seemed necessary. He had never questioned it, not until now. At a red light, Arthur drummed his fingers against the leather steering wheel. He imagined the brakes failing at high speed, the screech of tires, metal against concrete. His chest tightened. "This is insane," he muttered to himself. But when the light turned green, he didn't head toward the office. Instead, without planning, he swung into a U-turn. The GPS recalculated, but he ignored it. His gut told him what to do. Within minutes, he pulled into the garage of a mechanic he trusted, Jonas, a man who had worked on Arthur's sports cars for years and never asked unnecessary questions. Jonas wiped his hands on a rag, frowning at the sight of Arthur's car so early in the day. "Morning, Mr. Morgan. Something wrong?" Arthur stepped out, trying to keep his voice steady. "Check the brakes. Now, don't mention this to anyone." Jonas raised an eyebrow but nodded. "All right." The car was lifted, the undercarriage exposed. Arthur stood rigid, arms crossed, eyes locked on every move. The clink of tools echoed in the cavernous garage. Minutes dragged like hours. Then Jonas froze. His flashlight held steady on a section of cable near the rear wheel. He didn't move for several seconds. Finally, he called out quietly, "Mr. Morgan, you need to see this." Arthur's stomach dropped as he approached. Jonas pointed with the beam. The brake line was cut. Clean. Not frayed, not worn, but deliberately severed. Arthur staggered back, blood rushing in his ears. "This wasn't an accident," Jonas said grimly. "If you'd taken the highway, you wouldn't have made it far." Arthur swallowed hard, his throat dry. The boy's voice thundered back into his memory. "Your wife cut the brakes." He forced himself to breathe evenly, masking the storm inside. "Replace it, everything. Don't say a word." Jonas nodded, already moving. Arthur stepped outside, leaning against the wall of the garage. His hands trembled. The boy hadn't lied, which meant everything else. The late-night visits to the garage, the whispers, the excuses, could all be true. And if it was true, then the danger wasn't over. It was only beginning. If you want to know what happens when Arthur digs deeper and how the boy's warning changes everything, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss the rest of this story. Arthur stood outside the shop until the tremor in his hands settled. When Jonas finished, the mechanic handed back the keys with a solemn nod. "New lines, new fittings, test drive clean." "You're safe now," he said. Safe. The word rang hollow. The safest place in his life, the home he had built, the marriage he had curated, had just revealed a fault line cut by someone he trusted. Arthur slid into the driver's seat, started the car, and didn't point the nose toward his office. He aimed it back toward the city's rougher grid, hunting for a thin, barefoot voice that had saved his life. He searched the usual corners, under the flyover where vendors set up before dawn, by the shuttered newsstand near the bus depot where kids warmed their hands over coffee cans. On the third pass, he spotted him. The boy sat against a graffiti-splashed wall, knees hugged to a narrow chest, a plastic-wrapped stack of stale crackers in his lap. Arthur pulled to the curb and stepped out with his hands visible, as if approaching a spooked foal. The boy saw him and jerked to stand, ready to bolt. "I'm not here to hurt you," Arthur said. "You were right." The boy's jaw worked. "You checked." "I did." Arthur kept his voice low. You saved my life." They went to a corner diner because the boy refused a car ride. Arthur paid cash for 2 sodas and a hot sandwich. The kid ate with a quiet ferocity that made Arthur look away out of respect. Only when the first hunger receded did Arthur ask, "How did you know?" The boy's eyes flicked to the window. "My name is Lucas." He spoke like someone who had learned to ration words. "I was looking for a place to sleep. Your street's clean and quiet. I crawled behind a hedge by a big garage. Late. She came down the stairs carrying a metal box, kept checking over her shoulder. She went under the car. I heard her cutting. I know that sound." His throat tightened. "I've heard it before." "Before?" Lucas nodded, swallowed. "My parents died in a crash. Everyone said the brakes failed, but the cops later told my uncle it wasn't an accident. Somebody had cut them. I was in the back seat. I lived." He stared at the tabletop. "I know what cut metal sounds like." Arthur's knuckles whitened around his glass. "And you warned me anyway, knowing security might throw you onto the street. I didn't want to watch it happen again." Lucas's voice went flat. "I can't fix much, I can yell." For a moment, Arthur had no words. He reached into his wallet, wrote his cell number on a card, and slid it across. "If you ever need anything, you call me. Food, shoes, a safe bed, I mean it." Lucas hesitated, then tucked the card into his pocket like contraband. Arthur left him with cash for a few meals and a promise he wasn't sure how to honor yet. In the car, he pressed his palms to the wheel and stared through the windshield. He would need proof stronger than a boy's testimony and a mechanic's word. And if Larissa had been willing to sabotage a 2-ton machine to erase him, she'd be willing to erase a homeless witness. Lucas needed cover now, not later. Arthur called Roberto Hale, an old friend who ran a non-profit network for at-risk youth. "I need an emergency placement," Arthur said. "Today." 12-year-old, smart, skittish. No questions to him about anything except what he needs to feel safe. "Send me a location," Roberto said. "I'll meet you there within the hour." Arthur found Lucas again by the construction site, handed him a pair of new sneakers from a nearby shop and said, "Humor me." The boy tried them on. They fit. They walked 3 blocks to a small townhouse, overseen by a kind-eyed couple whose living room held a bookshelf and a dining table set for 4. Lucas stood in the doorway, as if the threshold masked a force field. "You can test it," Arthur said softly. "Food in the kitchen, bed with a door you can lock. If you hate it, we try somewhere else. I won't disappear." Lucas didn't move for a long beat. Then he crossed inside, touched the back of a chair like it might evaporate, and nodded once. Arthur felt something unclench in his chest. With Lucas placed, he drove home. Larissa was on the terrace, sunglasses on, a glossy travel magazine open, the picture of curated calm. She glanced over the rim. "You're late," she said. "Everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Arthur replied, schooling his face. "Car runs beautifully." Her lips curved. "Good." Arthur's study door closed with a soft click. He booted his private workstation and pulled up the home surveillance console. Password, 2-factor. He scrubbed through the previous 7 nights. Nothing until 2:37 a.m. the night before. There, a figure descending the stairs, robe belted, hair up. The garage light came on. She bent out of frame. The camera, angled for theft deterrence, not forensic detail, gave him silhouettes and time codes, but they were enough to anchor the truth. He exported the clip, then called Jonas back and asked for high-resolution photos of the cuts and a technician's statement. "Deliver to my office," Arthur said. "Hand to me only." By afternoon, a plain folder lay on his desk. Macro shots of the brake lines, the clean slice that spoke louder than words. He stared at them until the edges blurred. Why? He needed the why not for forgiveness, but to place his years into a box that made sense. He didn't sleep. The next morning, after a shower that did nothing to cool the heat under his skin, he walked into the living room, where Larissa stood in a white dress, arranging peonies. The perfection of it almost made him laugh. "We need to talk," he said. She arched an eyebrow. "About what?" He set the laptop on the marble console and hit play. The garage, the figure, the timestamps. Larissa's breath hitched, so small a flinch most would miss it, but Arthur had lived beside her long enough to chart the micro-weather of her face. "I also had a mechanic examine the car," he said. He placed the photographs beside the vase. Clean cuts, both rear lines. Silence deepened, thick as velvet. Larissa reached for the arrangement as if a petal out of place could restore a script. "You can't be serious." She laughed, brittle. "You think I would, what, kill you?" "I think you decided losing me was worse than losing me," Arthur said evenly. "I think you made a calculation and thought the world would call it a tragic accident. I think the boy at the gate ruined your math." Her eyes flashed. "Boy? Don't bother looking for him." His voice sharpened. "He's safe." The mask cracked. For a fraction of a second, something ugly surfaced. Rage, cornered pride, something ancient and cold. Then it was gone, replaced by offended disbelief. "Arthur, listen to yourself." "No," he said, and for the first time in a long time, the word felt like a foundation. "You listen. I've already spoken to council. You will leave the house today. The police will receive everything." She swallowed. "You won't do that. Think about the press, the board, your precious image." "I am," he said, "and I'm choosing to stay alive." 2 hours later, officers stood under the same balcony where she had once peered down at a barefoot warning. They served a protective order. Her suitcase clicked across the tiles. As Larissa crossed the threshold, she turned, eyes blazing with a promise he had seen before in hostile takeovers and courtroom foyers. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "No," Arthur said softly. "I regret other things." That night, the house felt cavernous and honest. Arthur drove to the townhouse with a bag of books and a pair of noise-cancelling headphones. Lucas met him on the stoop, hair still damp from a real shower, eyes wary but brighter. "How bad?" the boy asked. "Bad," Arthur said, then added, "but done." Lucas nodded, processing that simple arithmetic of danger reduced. He glanced at the bag. "What's that?" "Bribes," Arthur said. "Stories and tools to ignore the world when it gets loud." Lucas cracked a smile that transformed his whole face. They sat on the steps, sharing a paper boat of fries from the corner stand. The boy ate slower this time. "You planning to vanish now that I'm safe?" Lucas asked without looking at him. "I don't vanish," Arthur said. He meant it more than he expected. "I'll help Roberto get you enrolled. If you want to draw, we'll get you pencils that don't break. If you want to run, we'll buy shoes that don't blister. And if anyone ever makes you feel like your voice doesn't matter, you call me, and I remind them what it saved." Lucas stared at the street, then at the card in his pocket, then at Arthur. "Okay," he said. It was small, but it was everything. Days gathered into a rhythm. Police interviews, legal filings, investors reassured with facts instead of theater. The tabloids nipped at the edges, but the story never broke the way Larissa had predicted. The evidence was too clear, the narrative too simple. A man warned, a crime prevented, a clean exit. On a Saturday, Arthur took Lucas to a public art studio. Roberto's non-profit ran in a reclaimed warehouse. The boy hovered near the door until a volunteer put a charcoal stick in his hand. Within minutes, Lucas was sketching lines with an intensity that made Arthur step back and let the boy disappear into creation. The drawing that emerged was a cityscape from ground level. Puddles, tires, a low angle of sky. Not pretty, true. "Do you believe me now?" Lucas asked later, half teasing, half testing. "I believed you the moment I saw your eyes," Arthur said. The proof was for everyone else. As spring leaned into summer, Arthur understood that gratitude wasn't a transaction, it was a direction. He funded Roberto's emergency placement program with no press release attached. He sold the car Larissa had sabotaged and donated the proceeds to the art studio. He still liked driving, but he liked sleeping at night more. On the first day of school, Lucas shoved a battered backpack onto one shoulder and shuffled his new sneakers on the doormat. "You coming?" he asked. "I have a board call," Arthur said, then caught himself. He pulled out his phone, typed and hit send. "Actually, I have a walk." They went together to the corner where a yellow bus sighed to a halt. Lucas climbed the steps, paused and looked back, not for permission, for confirmation that the world could be different from what it had been. Arthur lifted 2 fingers. Lucas nodded once and vanished into the bus's bright belly. On the walk home, Arthur passed his own gate, the gravel neat, the hedges trimmed. He stopped where a voice had once torn through his morning and realized that what had saved him wasn't wealth or walls. It was a child who had nothing but truth and a willingness to shout it. The rest of his life, Arthur decided, would be measured by how well he listened. The mansion felt different with Larissa gone. Quieter, but not peaceful. Arthur walked the halls like a man exploring unfamiliar terrain, every portrait and polished surface reminding him of the illusion he had lived under. The truth sat in his chest like a stone. He had shared his bed with someone willing to end his life for convenience. Business associates whispered about marital issues, but Arthur let the speculation run. He didn't care anymore. What he did care about was Lucas. The boy was settling into his new foster placement, though Arthur knew it wasn't simple. Trust wasn't built overnight, especially for a child who had survived betrayal at the cruelest level. One afternoon, Arthur stopped by the townhouse unannounced. He found Lucas sketching on the stoop with a stub of pencil and a scrap of cardboard. The boy glanced up, wary as always, then relaxed slightly when he recognized him. "You still show up?" Lucas said. "I told you I would." Lucas shrugged. "Most people say that, then they don't." Arthur sat beside him. "Most people didn't save my life." The boy didn't answer, but Arthur noticed the corners of his mouth twitch. Small progress, but real. Later that week, Arthur met with detectives handling Larissa's case. They confirmed what he already knew. The brake lines were cut deliberately, and the surveillance footage supported it. With his testimony, the mechanic's statement, and the boy's account, the case was solid. But Arthur refused to involve Lucas formally. He wouldn't let the boy face lawyers who would tear him apart on the stand. "Find another way," Arthur told them. "He's just a kid." The detectives exchanged glances, but didn't argue. The evidence was enough. That night, Arthur sat in his study, lights dim, staring at the city skyline. He realized how close he had come to becoming another obituary, another headline about an accident that wasn't. And he thought of Lucas, how the boy had chosen to scream instead of staying silent. Arthur whispered to the empty room, "You didn't just save me, you gave me a second chance." For the first time in years, he believed it. The weeks after Larissa's arrest unfolded like a storm Arthur could not control. Yet strangely, he no longer feared it. The scandal was in the papers, the whispers in social circles were relentless, and lawyers and investigators moved through his days like shadows. But inside himself, Arthur felt lighter than he had in years. For the first time in a long while, the weight on his chest was gone. The danger was behind him. The lies were exposed, and somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, a boy who had once screamed at the gates of his mansion was slowly becoming part of his world. He visited Lucas often. At first, the boy didn't trust his visits. He expected Arthur to vanish, like all the other adults who had come and gone in his life. But Arthur kept showing up, sometimes with food, sometimes with books, sometimes with nothing at all but his presence. Each visit was a crack in the wall of distrust Lucas had built around himself. One Saturday, Arthur arrived earlier than usual. Lucas was outside in the backyard of the foster home, kicking a flat soccer ball. He chased it with determination, dribbling around invisible defenders, sprinting as if the ball weren't deflating beneath his feet. Arthur leaned against the fence for a while, just watching. Then he called out, "You're persistent," he said. Lucas turned, his hair messy, his eyes bright with effort. "If the ball's broken," he said between breaths, "you just kick harder." Arthur stepped onto the grass. "That's a lesson I should have learned years ago." The boy frowned in curiosity. "You're rich." What do you have to kick harder for? Arthur gave a small smile, but his eyes were heavy. For the things money can't buy. For family. For trust. For peace of mind. For a good night's sleep without wondering if the person beside you wants you gone. Lucas didn't laugh. He didn't mock. He just stared, and in that stare was something Arthur recognized immediately. Understanding. The boy knew about betrayal, about fear, about the way the world could strip away everything safe in an instant. And it struck Arthur how unfair it was that a 12-year-old could already carry that kind of wisdom. The trial against Larissa dragged on for weeks, but the outcome was inevitable. The mechanic's testimony about the clean cuts in the brake lines, the blurry footage of her figure bending near the car in the middle of the night, the inconsistencies in her own statements, it all built a wall of evidence impossible to climb. At first, she denied it all, spinning stories of conspiracies, claiming she had been framed, but little by little, her defenses cracked. In the courtroom, Arthur sat in the front row, his hands steady on his knees, watching a woman he realized he had never truly known. She admitted in a trembling voice that she had feared divorce, feared losing her wealth and social standing, feared becoming invisible. She said she never meant for it to go that far, that she only wanted to scare him. But Arthur knew better. Someone who cut brakes was someone who had chosen destruction over honesty. When the verdict came, and Larissa was led out in handcuffs, her expression a mixture of rage and humiliation, Arthur didn't feel triumph. He felt grief, not grief for her, but for the years he had wasted building a life with someone who could smile at him while plotting his death. As the cameras flashed outside the courthouse, journalists shouting questions, Arthur gave only one answer before walking away. What's next? Life. Real life. That evening he drove to the foster home again. Lucas was at the kitchen table, hunched over a notebook, his lips moving silently as he worked through math problems. Arthur set a bag of food on the table and sat across from him. "You're serious about this," Arthur said. Lucas shrugged. "You told me choices matter. This is mine." Arthur studied him for a long moment, seeing not just a boy, but the outline of someone stronger than life had any right to demand from him. "I want you to know something," Arthur said finally. "You'll never have to sleep on the streets again, not while I'm alive." The pencil froze in Lucas's hand. He looked up slowly, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "You mean that?" Arthur's voice was steady. "More than anything I've ever said." Lucas stared at him, his fingers tightening around the pencil until his knuckles went white. "People promise things, then they leave. I'm not leaving." Arthur leaned forward. "You saved my life. And now I'm going to make sure you get the chance to live yours." For a long moment, Lucas didn't reply. Then, slowly, he nodded. Not with blind faith, not with childish hope, but with a cautious acceptance that maybe, just maybe, this man was telling the truth. Time passed. Arthur kept his word. Lucas started school again, ate meals every day, slept in a real bed. He discovered he liked drawing, filling notebooks with sketches of cars, streets, and people. Arthur visited often, sometimes bringing books, sometimes just sitting with him in the park, talking about nothing important. And as the weeks turned into months, Lucas began to smile more, to laugh, to look less like a boy carrying the weight of the world. One afternoon, while they walked together through a park, Lucas asked a question out of nowhere. "Why do you believe in me so much? There are people who don't believe in me even when they look me in the eyes." Arthur looked out at the skyline before answering. "Because I learned something. Sometimes the people with the least to give end up saving everything. You had nothing. No home, no family, no reason to shout for me at that gate. And yet you did. That's worth more than all the money I have." Lucas looked at him, and for the first time in months, Arthur saw something new in the boy's face. Peace. A peace that came not from safety, but from finally being believed in. That night, when Arthur sat alone on the balcony of his mansion, he thought of how close he had come to losing everything. All it had taken to save him was the voice of a boy no one cared to notice. He thought of how fragile life could be, how thin the line between luxury and disaster really was, and he realized that courage didn't come dressed in suits or standing at podiums. Sometimes it came barefoot, covered in dirt, shouting at the top of its lungs just to be heard. The house was quiet now. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, open, almost like a new beginning. Arthur closed his eyes and let himself breathe freely for the first time in years. He owed his life not to wealth, not to reputation, not to the woman he once thought he loved, but to a boy named Lucas who refused to stay silent. And maybe that was the lesson no one could ever forget. Sometimes the people we overlook are the very ones who save us. Sometimes the voices we ignore are the ones that matter most. So, dear listener, if this story touched you, take a moment to show your support. Leave a like, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what would you have done in Arthur's place? Because in the end, it's not the wealth, the power, or the appearance that keeps us alive. Sometimes it's the courage of a stranger who refuses to be ignored.